Welcome into CBS News 24/7. I'm Elizabeth Cook. We are expecting an update now any moment on a briefing over last week's deadly mid-air collision over Washington, D.C. Crews have been combing through the wreckage, and Unified Command is set to give an update at the podium. We will bring those comments to you live when they happen. Switching gears, though, all eyes on the White House today as President Trump gears up to host his first meeting with an international leader in Washington. In just a few hours, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will sit down with Trump to discuss the second phase of the hostage negotiations with Hamas. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins us now for more on all this. Weijia, great to see you. What details are we learning about this meeting happening later on today?
Well, Liz, you already mentioned what the top line is probably going to be, and that is how and if Israel will, in fact, move into that second phase of the ceasefire agreement and hostage release agreement that, of course, the Biden administration brokered, but the Trump administration is tasked with implementing. And that is a big question, Liz, because there are a lot of different calculations that Netanyahu has to take into effect, including his own political preservation when it comes to exactly how to completely unwind. But of course, Trump has taken full ownership of this agreement. He said that it was because of him that it finished that it crossed over to the finish line. And so they want all of the hostages to be released. They want the deal to be successful, and there might be some tension there. We also expect these two leaders will talk about how to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions, as well as how to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. But Liz, I think what's really important here is just the fact that Trump has chosen to host Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel as his first meeting with any world leader, because that really is meant to set a tone for a focus on his foreign policy. Of course, Biden chose Japan, and then we saw 4 years of several different actions to really strengthen ties with allies in that region to combat China. So this is much more than just any meeting. It's not just about the U.S. and Israel. It's about Trump's priorities as it relates to the international stage.
And ahead of this meeting with Netanyahu, Weijia, President Trump will sign several executive orders about the U.S.'s involvement in the Middle East. What more do we know about those orders, and how is this going to impact his conversation with Netanyahu?
Well, the main order that we have been reporting out this morning is against Iran. Again, it's all about Iran's ambitions to create a nuclear weapon, and the Trump administration says they are going to put a maximum pressure on campaign on Iran to make sure they block any pathway to any such weapon. And so they are going to be enforcing strong sanctions on oil exports from Iran, really trying to hit their purse strings. And this certainly will be a big conversation between Netanyahu and Trump, because there are other conversations happening in Israel about whether that is enough and whether there ought to be more, perhaps a preemptive strike against Iran. And so the two leaders will have to discuss that as it relates to all of the countries in that region, and certainly national security here at home, too.
And Weijia, I want to make sure we talk about tariffs. China imposed retaliatory tariffs after Trump's tariffs went into effect last night. Can you walk us through the back and forth between these two leaders?
So this is nothing new. Trump has actually used tariffs on China before during the first administration. But what is new is sort of where these tariffs will be impacted, and the retaliation that we've seen so far from China, which obviously does not want a trade war right now, considering its own economy is in a vulnerable state. So you're right in that the tariffs against Chinese imports went into effect at midnight, and China has already responded with responsive tariffs. So that's going to be a 15% tax on certain types of coal and liquefied natural gas, a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, and large displacement cars and pickup trucks, and a few other sectors as well. And so the Trump administration says is in order to put pressure on Beijing to do more to stop the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. And of course, we should note that in the previous administration, Biden and Xi Jinping did sign an agreement in November of 2023 to try to do just that by limiting the amount of ingredients for fentanyl that China can export to other countries. But we should also note that there has not been a substantial decrease in the amount of fentanyl seizures since that. And so that is why Trump is saying they clearly have not done enough and need to do more to stop this deadly drug from coming in. We'll see how and if China responds. But, as far as more tariffs, at this point, we haven't heard about another step from the U.S.'s part to respond to the retaliatory tariffs. But again, that's always an option for Trump, considering the percentage on Chinese tariffs was 10%. On Mexico and Canada, it was going to be 25%. So that's just an example of sort of the wiggle room that administration might have to raise the percentage even more.
Weijia, just moments ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed reporters during his visit to Costa Rica, and he commented on El Salvador's offer to accept and imprison U.S. criminals. We want to play back that sound and then talk on the other side.
And that's an offer President Bukele made. Obviously, we'll have to study it on our end. There are obviously legalities involved. We have a constitution. We have all sorts of things. But it's a very generous offer. No one's ever made an offer like that. And to outsource at a fraction of the cost, at least some of the most dangerous and violent criminals that we have in the United States. But obviously the administration will have to make a decision. I raised it yesterday because it's an incredible offer and an unprecedented one.
Weijia, can you walk us through what this offer was to take in U.S. prisoners and have them actually imprisoned in El Salvador? What does that country get out of this? What is this arrangement?
That's just part of the offer, because what really matters here is what the U.S. wanted El Salvador to do, which is to take illegal, undocumented immigrants that are here in the U.S. As the president continues to, carry out what he calls the biggest mass deportation in American history. The problem with that is that these people have to go somewhere, and there are several countries who have already said they are not willing to take the people who are currently detained in the U.S., especially if they are known gang members or criminals. And so El Salvador has agreed to be a third party, a third country to take in some of those criminals, while also offering to take in Americans. Now, Rubio is America's top diplomat, which is why his answer was so diplomatic. He reiterated that it was a kind offer, but this is not about American criminals at all. This is not about finding a place for American citizens to go. So even though he had to address it and use that sort of flowery language to talk about what a generous offer it is, he also mentioned the kind of legal and constitutional challenges that would arise if that were even, pursued. And so I don't think that, it's something that the U.S. is going to seriously consider, Liz.
All right, Weijia Jiang, thanks so much for putting that into context. All right, sources tell CBS News that President Trump may sign an executive order to dismantle the Department of Education. Now, this move is not imminent, but it does fall in line with DOJ's push to shrink funding for federal agencies. Now, the Department of Education has the smallest staff of all 15 cabinets, but it carries the third largest discretionary budget. The government contributes about 8% to elementary and secondary education here in the U.S. And some of that funding does come from the Department of Education. Popular programs, though, like Head Start and school lunches, are funded by Health and Human Services and the Department of Agriculture. Other programs under the Education Department help economically disadvantaged children and those with special needs. The agency also distributes federal financial aid for education, including college loan programs and Pell Grants. The president wasted no time making changes to the department after taking office. He signed an executive order last week that prioritizes federal funding for school choice programs. That move allows parents to forego their local public schools in favor of vouchers. Now, we do want to point out, much of the directives included in that order can't move forward without approval from Congress. Now, Trump tapped former head of Small Business Administration Linda McMahon to run the Department of Education. Her confirmation hearings are on Capitol Hill, and they have not been scheduled yet. McMahon would be tasked with turning around the dark reality among students. Recent reports show 40% of fourth graders did not meet basic reading levels. That marks the highest percentage ever recorded. And breaking just moments ago on Capitol Hill, President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Doug Collins, has just secured the votes for confirmation. The vote is still open, so it's not final yet, but it's expected that he will be confirmed. Senators, meanwhile, working as fast as possible to get President Trump his full cabinet. Collins, just the latest of nominees to cross that finish line. Later today, we expect a final vote on Trump's nominee to lead the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi. Collins will now join the list of nominees who are actively performing their new roles. CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is live for us at Capitol Hill, following it all for us, and she joins us now. Caitlin, great to see you. Where do we stand on the vote on Pam Bondi later on today?
Well, she is expected eventually to get confirmed. She has consolidated the Republican support around her. And so there are, just questions about when exactly that will happen. You do have Democrats up here on Capitol Hill trying to delay the process for a lot of these nominees in a way to kind of combat and address their disagreements with the administration over pretty much everything, but especially over these latest actions regarding USAID. We'll see whether that has any kind of effect, but by and large, Pam Bondi will be the next Attorney General.
All right, we got to talk about RFK Jr. He just cleared a major hurdle in his confirmation process earlier today after his nomination passed a key committee vote. What's next for him? Is it all but confirmed?
Well, today's vote was so important because Bill Cassidy was that last remaining vote of whether he would actually get through committee. He's a Republican senator from Louisiana. He's also a physician, and during the committee hearings last week expressed some real concerns about Kennedy's past statements on vaccines. And so going into this committee vote, we did not know how Cassidy would vote on Kennedy. He ended up, of course, supporting him. And just over an hour ago, he took to the Senate floor to explain how he got to yes. And I think this is important to kind of understand how he got here. First, he said that he got a commitment from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to go with the regular ways of approving vaccines, not instituting additional parallel structures. He also talked to, in his telling, Kennedy about the importance of vaccines and the importance of the science behind them, and that they do not cause autism, as we heard the president himself trying to suggest. So he also got assurances that they will have what he called a close, unprecedentedly close relationship, that he will talk to him several times a month, that he will come before the committee for review and checkups essentially every quarter if they request it. And basically, Cassidy was saying he wants to keep a close eye on Kennedy, but he did get the assurances that he wants. And it was important to note from the floor, Cassidy was making this point about the safety of vaccines. And I think hovering over all of this, the way in which there have been these concerns with this confirmation or impending confirmation about the messages going out to people. He is likely to get confirmed. There could still be holdouts. We're watching Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, those moderate Republicans who tend to go their own way sometimes, so we'll see where they are. Also, Mitch McConnell, who himself is a polio survivor, has been very vocal about the importance of vaccines and critical of some of Kennedy's past statements. We'll watch to see where they go, but the point is that Cassidy's support today really paved the way for Kennedy's confirmation.
All right, CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Thanks so much, Caitlin. Well, the Justice Department putting pressure on FBI agents involved in the January 6 investigations. We'll have a live report from Capitol Hill when we come back. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Breaking news, FBI agents have filed a lawsuit over the U.S. Justice Department's efforts to identify agents who are participated in investigations related to January 6th. Now, this comes as we're on watch for a potential major shakeup of the FBI. Now, a reminder, FBI employees across the country were directed yesterday to turn in a questionnaire to supervisors about their possible work on January 6th cases. Supervisors collected the questionnaires, and today is the deadline to hand that information over to the Justice Department. Joining us now is CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, thank you so much for being with us. First and foremost, talk about the gravity of this targeted questionnaire and what it really means for these FBI agents.
There's a concern that this will have a chilling effect on the FBI and its agents for the near future, if not for the long-term future of the FBI. That they're being questioned and scrutinized for their roles in the January 6th investigation is sending a message that they have to be careful what investigation they take next. That they may have to be careful not to take a case that may displease President Trump. So no matter if there are mass firings, mass resignations or not, a bell has already been rung that they can't unring. Now, what will happen next? Will there be large-scale employment actions? The showing of the door to many of the FBI agents? We're going to find that out in the hours and days to come. We do know from our CBS News reporting there are potentially thousands of FBI employees and agents impacted by this review. This January 6th investigation was no small thing, and it was not isolated to Washington, D.C. This was a national investigation involving nearly every U.S. state, all FBI field offices, and that yielded 1,500 plus defendants. So a lot of agents have their fingerprints on these cases. I think the more pressing concern right now is what challenges can be mustered and galvanized to stop or slow down any type of removal. There's a lawsuit just filed by 9 anonymous FBI employees trying to challenge the gathering of these names and any actions by the Department of Justice. They say, among other things, this is a violation of their rights, of their privacy, and what's more, they argue this list of employees who handle January 6 cases is potentially a piece of nitroglycerin. If it falls into the wrong hands, it's a national security concern, and these employees could be subjected to threats.
And to be clear, Scott, do FBI agents have a choice as to what case they're given to investigate? And I mean, are these employees essentially being investigated for doing their jobs?
That's what the advocates and the legal representatives of these FBI employees are saying, that FBI agents were doing their job. They were taking assignments, doing them diligently, and for my 4 years of covering the January 6 prosecutions, there was not one occasion where a judge laid a glove on what the FBI agents and employees did in the field. There was no question raised in the courts or adjudicated in the courts that showed misconduct by the FBI that would warrant disciplinary actions. They're simply surveying these employees to find out if they did any interviews. Did they do any arrests? Did they do any searches? That's the blocking and tackling of investigative work. This is what FBI agents are supposed to do.
Right. So what could happen next? And if this purge happens, is this a threat to public safety?
The removal of FBI agents, short of disciplinary reasons, short of significant cause, is going to thin out FBI field offices nationwide potentially. And there are big task forces these January 6th lead agents have as the rest of their job. Some of them are on the Violent Crimes Task Force. Some of them help pursue child sex predators. An awful lot of them, according to our CBS News review, are part of joint terrorism task forces in communities nationwide. These are agents that serve from Chicago to Colorado, California, Connecticut, New York, Texas. They would be winnowing out some pretty significant units inside the Bureau.
Yeah, there's a trickle-down effect to all of this. Scott MacFarlane, thank you so much for that insight. Well, we are following more breaking news, this time out of Sweden, where police say at least 10 people are dead after a shooting at an adult education center. They still have not determined how many people total were wounded and say that death toll may rise. The school where the shooting happened is located in Örebro, about 125 miles west of Stockholm. It serves students over the age of 20, offering a number of classes, including Swedish for immigrants and vocational training for those with intellectual disabilities. Now, school shootings are rare in Sweden, and police say there were no warning signs before that attack. Police say the damage at the crime scene is extensive, but they don't suspect terrorism as the cause of this shooting at this time. All right, to Northern California now, and a live look at a very stormy Golden Gate Bridge in downtown San Francisco. An atmospheric river bearing down on the western United States right now. Let's bring in meteorologist Jessica Birch. Jess, can you give us a kind of a timing of all this?
You know, throughout the afternoon hours today, that storm is expected to intensify, actually. They're going to see plenty of rain all throughout the West Coast as we head into the afternoon and evening hours tonight. Now, I'm going to see if I could refresh this real fast in live time. As we head into the next couple of days, we're going to see this storm actually died down. It looks like the floor map's not working right now, so I could show you it just as well on the matrix behind me. This atmospheric river, it's packing a punch. Really what it is, it's just water vapor suspended in the atmosphere as it pushes its way in from the tropics. Now, this is going to bring in heavy amounts of rain throughout the Bay Area, like you saw in that live look, but it's also bringing in plenty of snow for our friends up into the Tahoe area, which will be great for the ski season, but still very hard for travelers as we head into the next couple days. That snow reaches all the way up into the Cascades too. We can't forget the Pacific Northwest. They're getting hit just as much with rain and snow as we head into the coming days. Now, there's flood warnings that the National Weather Service has issued, as well as winter storm warnings up just near Tahoe, and we are expected to see scattered thunderstorms as we head into the afternoon hours today. It looks like the storm is starting to strengthen as we head into the next 24, well, at least the next 12 hours, and then heading into the overnight hours tonight, that's when it starts to die down. But until then, we could see anywhere up to around 8 inches of rain, and just locally in some smaller communities in Northern California. Our friends over into the Southern Cascades expected to see anywhere up to around 2 feet of snow with an additional 5 feet all the way over into the Sierra. So this is going to be a strong system. Not only are we dealing with flood watches and warnings, we're also dealing with wind advisories too. We can see wind gusts today anywhere up to around 40 to 50 miles per hour.
We're getting it all. Rain, wind, snow,
yeah,
you name it.
Atmospheric river season here in the Bay Area.
There you go. Thank you, Jess.
Of course.
Well, coming up, China biting back after President Trump imposes tariffs on Chinese goods. What this means for your wallet. You're watching CBS News 24/7. The tiff over tariffs intensifies between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The U.S. imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese imports last night, prompting China to quickly respond with tariffs of its own. But tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods are paused after both countries made a deal on border security with President Trump. CBS News national correspondent Nikki Batiste is in Detroit with the very latest.
We are here next to the Ambassador Bridge. This is the busiest international border crossing when it comes to trade in North America. This is a spot President Trump is worried about. In 2 phone calls yesterday with Canadian's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, they came to an agreement. Trudeau agreed to add personnel, to add technology along the border to help secure it. They also launched a cooperative to fight organized crime, smuggling of fentanyl, and money laundering between the two countries. So again, a pause for 30 days. President Trump likely looking to see what happens before making any more decisions. We are in Detroit. This is a big auto industry city. General Motors, one of the biggest, has 3 plants just across the border in Canada. They make 2 of the most critical parts for cars, V8 engines and dual auto transmissions that go out worldwide. So there's a lot of concern among the auto industry. Some already seeing prices go up for steel and aluminum here, even with the pause on tariffs. When it comes to Canadians just across the border, the reaction there has been pretty upset. We've seen boycotting of some U.S. products, particularly liquor, and even booing at sporting events. Canadians saying the U.S., our best ally, we're friends. What's going on here? And I think that's what we will all wait to see. Back to you.
Nikki, thanks so much. Let's bring in CBS News business contributor Javier David with the very latest on these tariffs from China. Javier, are Americans going to start feeling the pain of all of this soon?
Well, that's a really interesting question because tariffs are these viewed as these negotiating tools, kind of a bargaining chip of sorts. They yield results, but like there's so much uncertainty. There's a pause. There's a whole question about whether they'll take effect at all, whether they'll look like they do right now. So this is a good question because it's hard for companies to sort of price these things in. They have to account for a lot. They have to plan how to invest, and more importantly of all, what to charge their customers. So the longer this whole kerfuffle drags out, the more difficult it will be for a lot of companies to figure out their pricing and whether they need to account by raising those costs.
Yeah, it's interesting because China imposed tariffs on some U.S. goods, but not all. I mean, I was looking closely at Apple and some technology products that we definitely need China for. Those are not impacted by this, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so just minutes after Trump's tariffs took effect, China announced it's launching an investigation into Google. So what's that all about?
So that probe shows kind of how, China can really wrong foot American companies. Many of them are reliant on the world's second economy for their revenues. And so playing in the background of all of this is, of course, TikTok, which is this geopolitical football. And all of these companies are getting sort of now caught in this tit for tat between the world's two biggest economies, and there's no resolution. So it shows in a lot of ways, again, the reliance on China for American companies, and B, how China can really kind of step in and say, if you're doing this to us, we're going to do that to you.
And another move from President Trump that we want to ask you about, he's establishing what's called a sovereign wealth fund, saying could be used to buy TikTok. So what is a sovereign wealth fund?
So this is very exciting for me because I covered this and I actually wrote this story over 10 years ago. So I'm super excited that people are talking about this again. All that said, sovereign wealth funds, think the Middle East, think the Scandinavian countries. They have a lot of oil revenues. They're basically a state-funded, state-operated investment vehicle, and they have all of this money coming in from wherever, and they take it and they deploy it in their economies, and they deploy it externally in other people's economies. So it's a big, giant fund where the revenues are derived, usually from natural resources. But in this case, this is, it's a very interesting thing because what you have, and some conservatives have also voiced concerns about this, you have a major government entity that's operating in the private markets, and that creates distortions, that creates the potential for corruption. You just never know. But it is a fascinating model in and of itself, and a number of countries have been able to sort of make it work for them.
Yeah, but those countries are operating at a surplus. The U.S. is not. We are constantly in a deficit. So how would it benefit the U.S. to have this, pot of money if we're in debt?
This is, it's very much an open question. And again, it gets to the heart of whether or not it is advisable for a government entity to sort of use all of this money, private capital, and deploy it however it sees fit. And so when you have someone in office that you agree with, it's always great. But when the next guy comes along, you set a precedent for them, and they can do something completely different. They can use that money to sort of maybe cover the deficit. Or they can use it to sort of buy things that you may not agree with. So there's a whole lot of questions here that are really unresolved at this point.
All right, I want to talk about this story that's on the other end of the spectrum here, Javier. Waffle House charging more for eggs? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, eggs, we're in it's been a very difficult year, like the bird flu, there are shortages everywhere. This costs companies, and it just kind of goes to show you how difficult it is to restrain market forces. Like, companies have to pay real money for these things. They have to pay for a range of ingredients. And the end of the day, they're going to pass those along to their consumers if they can help it. So your favorite omelet and your favorite egg dish is going to cost you a little more, primarily because it's costing companies more to procure these things.
Sure. All right. Thank you so much, Javier David, for that insight. Always great to talk to you. Thanks. Well, still ahead here on CBS News 24/7, what we know about migrant flights to Guantanamo Bay as the Trump administration scrambles to carry out this White House order. You're watching CBS News 24/7. The government is moving quickly to turn facilities at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base into an immigration detention center. CBS News reports the first group of migrant detainees will arrive at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base today. Last week, Mr. Trump instructed his administration to dramatically expand detention space inside the naval base to detain as many as 30,000 high-priority, unauthorized immigrants with criminal records. Now, for decades, the Guantanamo base has included a facility known as the Migrant Operations Center. That area is separate from Guantanamo Bay's detention center, the post-9/11 military prison where the U.S. still holds more than a dozen terrorism suspects. And we are expecting an update now any moment on a briefing over last week's deadly mid-air collision over Washington, D.C. For now, we know authorities arrested and charged 2 Reagan Washington National Airport employees for leaking unauthorized cell phone video footage of that crash. Meanwhile, cleanup crews started the process of removing debris from the crash out of the Potomac River yesterday. The initial focus here is on the American Airlines plane and then the Black Hawk helicopter. Officials say they had to stop the salvage operation several times after finding more human remains. So far, authorities identified 55 of the 67 victims on both aircraft. Chris Van Cleve has the very latest on the salvage.
Recovery efforts in the Potomac River are focused on the front of the airplane to include the flight deck. We know that one piece of fuselage has been taken out of the water this morning. Crews were waiting for high tide to try to then get the front of the airplane out of the water and onto a barge. Eventually, all of those pieces will come ashore and go to a hangar at Washington Reagan's National Airport, where the NTSB will be able to more closely examine the wreckage. They also have an exemplar airplane, a CRJ-700 there, that they can compare against the wreckage. That's helpful in things like looking at the cockpit configuration, switches, positioning, that kind of thing. Ongoing also is this effort to understand the data from the flight recorders on both the airplane and the helicopter. That is a complicated task that will take some time. Also, a team of investigators are building timelines. They're going over the training of all of the pilots, building a 72-hour calendar of their lives as to leading up to this accident, as well as the maintenance history of the 2 aircraft. They have completed their interviews with air traffic controllers, the 5 air traffic controllers that were in the tower when the incident happened. And then we are waiting for an update from the NTSB about some of the things they've been able to glean so far. But, you know, final answers, things like the cause of this accident, that won't come for months. We expect this investigation from the NTSB to last up to a year before a report comes out that will determine the probable causes of this accident. For now, the focus is on getting the airplane wreckage out of the water and continuing to work to identify the remaining victims of this crash. At least 55 have been identified. 67 people lost their lives. Back to you.
State and local officials are facing increasing demands from the Trump administration to fulfill campaign promises regarding immigration. CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanga sat down with 4 sheriffs from across the U.S. for a reality check on the White House directive.
When you knock on doors in your community, do you ask someone what their status is?
No, I don't.
When that 911 call comes in, we don't care what your status is. We spent years trying to build trust with these communities so that they know we don't care about your status. We want to make sure you have justice.
Are you concerned that the next 4 years are going to undermine that trust in law enforcement?
Absolutely. They're going to be terrified. We see it now. We get phone calls, right? Folks are saying, are you going to be coming for our family members?
Let's go live now to Nicole Skanga for more on this compelling interview. Nicole, tell us more about how the sheriffs are reacting to Trump's asks here.
Yeah, the overwhelming feeling among these sheriffs is they're being asked to do more with less. And the big ask from the White House right now, more boots on the ground and more detention space. ICE is funded to detain a daily average at max of 41,500 migrants. But the agency currently has about 40,000 detainees, and it's looking for sheriffs for more prison beds and manpower. That near unanimous feeling from the sheriffs I spoke with is that they're already at capacity. Sheriff Candy Fothery, she's from Ohio. She told me her jail has been filled since the 1990s, and it's filled with violent criminals, those accused of murder, rape, arson, and domestic violence, plus a large population of mentally ill individuals. If asked to take on more detainees with civil immigration offenses, individuals whose only offense here is being here illegally, what happens to those who are currently behind bars? There's also the challenge of manpower, and Sheriff Benny Martinez's community sits right along the border, Brooks County. He has 5 deputies on the ground covering 944 square miles of ranch lands. He's already overwhelmed, and the president of the National Sheriff's Association told me every sheriff in his organization, and there are more than 3,000, is facing some kind of recruitment or retention challenge. Then, you heard it there, there's the concern that if local law enforcement assists in making these immigration arrests, it may come at the cost of sheriffs and deputies losing some of that trust they've built up in their communities.
Spoke directly to the White House border czar about all of this. What specifically is his pitch to these sheriffs, and what is the Department of Homeland Security doing to find more detention bed space?
Yeah, well, they've certainly been previewing, opening up some detention space at Guantanamo Bay. But what the White House border czar Tom Homan told me in our interview over the weekend is that top immigration officials are specifically working to expand what's called the 287G program. And they met as recently as last week on this. It's a post-9/11 program that sets up contracts, literal contracts, between sheriffs and police departments nationwide and ICE, and it allows local law enforcement to join immigration task forces and to detain non-citizens in their jails and prisons. There are currently 135 sheriffs and police departments part of that program, most of them in places like Florida and Texas. So I asked Tom Homan, what's the goal? He told me he wants all 3,000 plus sheriffs signed up by the end of this year. But the challenge here, finding ways to compensate local law enforcement who say they're already cash-strapped and resource poor without detention beds to spare. But I also asked the White House border czar what happens if a sheriff wants to help apprehend migrants with a criminal record, a criminal arrest warrant, but says they don't have the bandwidth to go after undocumented individuals with no other offensive. In other words, undocumented migrants whose only offense is being here illegally in the U.S. Homan did tell me he would work individually with each sheriff, but ICE is not shying away from making those collateral arrests, unlike the last administration.
Yeah, and Nicole, the Justice Department is also saying that they could prosecute officials who resist Trump's immigration agenda. They put out a memo about this. How are the sheriffs reacting to that threatening directive?
I asked the sheriffs that exact question. Take a listen to what one sheriff had to say. The first week of this administration, the Department of Justice put out a memo calling on U.S. attorneys to investigate and potentially prosecute state and local officials who do not cooperate with stepped-up immigration enforcement measures.
You can't bully me to break the law, okay? And you can't threaten me with prosecution. I am going to do everything I can to operate within the law and be helpful. However, I'm not crossing the line.
That was Sheriff Gabe Morgan. He's been the sheriff of Newport News, Virginia for nearly 2 decades. He told me his state has specific laws about how long he can detain an undocumented migrant for ICE. And while he wants to help federal agents get those with criminal charges off the street, he's not willing to break the law. Now, I should note that all of the sheriffs here did express a real sympathy with administration officials, including the president, when they call out violent crime, drug trafficking, cartel violence, especially along the northern and southern borders. And those are real issues in the country, according to these sheriffs. But they also told me that public safety threats, not individuals in the country illegally, are their #1 priority to their constituents in their communities, and that the federal government should understand their needs, their limitations as sheriffs, if they're also asking for their help, Liz.
Yeah, they've been put in a very difficult position there. Nicole Skanga, thank you so much. It is our our eye on America. CBS News' commitment to hear your stories in your communities. Many people are worried about their families after the ICE raids and deportations across the country. CBS News Miami's Morgan Reiner shows you the worries for one woman in South Florida.
This mom paced outside of the U.S. Immigration and Customs building in Miramar, which is 30 minutes northwest of Miami.
I'm just waiting on my loved one inside to see if, how it is. Because honestly, he missed one of the court dates.
She's waiting on her son. He received a letter in the mail from ICE. She doesn't remember exactly what it said, just one word, deportation. So she drove him here to sort it out.
It's terrible, terrified. I'm very terrified, I'm just hoping for the best for my loved one and everyone else.
From Jamaica, she said she and her son came here legally, but she understands why some choose not to wait.
Sometimes they don't have a choice, Sometimes they want to get away from the chaos that's going on. Sometimes they're in danger, their family in danger.
According to ICE, thousands of migrants have been arrested across the country, some of them right here in South Florida. Video surveillance captured one of their raids in Brownsville, which is in Miami-Dade County. One man told us his wife was taken during the raid.
She already had a court date. She was good. Everything's good. He just came in and snatched her.
These are pictures from the Department of Homeland Security detaining other undocumented men and women in Broward County.
Just hope for the best. Just leave everything in God's hands.
I'm Morgan Reiner, CBS News, Miami.
All right, switching gears now. An atmospheric river arrived over Northern California Monday afternoon, bringing lots of rain and snow to the Sierra Tahoe area. Near whiteout conditions here. Let's bring in meteorologist Jessica Birch. Welcome news for skiers soon. They don't want to be skiing in that now, but come later on in the week, it's going to be great. But right now, it's pretty hairy out there.
Listen, we're not even done just yet. I mean, this atmospheric river is still strengthening as we head into the afternoon hours today. We're seeing rain accumulate anywhere up to around 2 to 5 inches just along that California coastline just from today's system alone. And then on top of that, we're also dealing with heavy amounts of snow from the Sierra all the way over to the Cascades. So let's dive into that. Behind me, what you're seeing is that atmospheric river still intensifying into the afternoon and evening hours tonight. It's being pulled in also by this area of low pressure just to the north. It actually helps it arrive to the Cascades just up into Oregon and Washington as well. Now there's winter storm warnings in effect throughout the Tahoe region, making it challenging for skiers to get to those areas. And then we're also dealing with thunderstorm activity throughout the Bay today, anywhere from San Francisco all the way down into San Jose. We'll keep you updated on that here in the Weather Center.
Jess, thanks so much. You may have heard of microplastics, those harmful, tiny plastic pieces smaller than a pencil eraser. Well, now a new study shows there's a higher concentration of them inside the human brain than any other organs. Research published in the medical journal Nature Medicine found the presence of those fragments increased more than 50% over the last 8 years. And the Lakers have officially introduced NBA superstar Luka Doncic following one of the most stunning trades in sports history. Take a listen to this. All right, well, excuse me for
everybody was surprised, so you can imagine how surprised I was. I was almost asleep, so when I got a call, I had to check it was April 1st. I didn't really believe it at first, and it was a bit shock. It was hard moments for me. It was home, so it was really hard moments for me, especially the first day. But as I said, I get to play in the greatest club in the world, and I'm excited for this new journey.
Now, the Dallas Mavericks sent Doncic to the Lakers on Sunday with no warning to players, including Doncic himself. Dallas gets all-star big man Anthony Davis in return. Just last season, Doncic brought the Mavericks to the NBA Finals, where they ultimately lost to the Celtics. The Lakers hope Doncic will find a home in L.A. alongside NBA legend LeBron James. So some big news coming out of the sports world. And we're following the biggest news coming out of Capitol Hill and across the world. Stay with CBS News 24/7 for the very latest updates. I'll see you tomorrow.